On November 13, 1002, one of the most infamous massacres in English history took place, the St. Brice's Day Massacre. Ordered by King Ethelred the Unready, it was an event that would have far-reaching consequences, shaping the future of England and its relationship with the Vikings. But what led to this violent purge, and what were its lasting effects? Let's find out. To fully understand the events leading to the St. Brice's Day Massacre, we must first look at the Viking incursions that plagued England for over 2 centuries. The late 10th century was a period of relentless raids and invasions by the Norsemen, particularly the Danes. These warriors, known for their seafaring prowess and brutal tactics, struck fear into the hearts of the Anglo-Saxons. The first recorded Viking raid on England took place in 793 at the monastery of Lindisfarne, marking the beginning of an era of violence and destruction. By the time Ethelred came to power in 978, Viking raids had evolved from mere plundering expeditions to full-scale invasions aimed at settlement and control. Throughout the 9th and 10th centuries, large areas of England had fallen under Viking control, particularly in the region known as the Danelaw, a vast territory where Danish settlers established their own laws, customs, and governance. Æthelred's primary strategy to deal with the Viking threat was through payments of Danegeld, a form of tribute paid to the invaders to prevent further attacks. However, this policy had severe consequences. The payments drained the kingdom's treasury and only encouraged further Viking aggression, as the Danes saw England as a wealthy and weak target. The more England paid, the more the Vikings demanded. Between 991 and 1002, Ethelred paid vast sums to the Vikings, amounting to tens of thousands of pounds of silver, yet the attacks did not stop. But there was another aspect to the Viking presence in England: Danish settlers who had established themselves peacefully within the kingdom. These settlers, some of whom had integrated into Anglo-Saxon society, were viewed with suspicion by the English authorities. Rumors began to spread that these Danes who lived among the English were conspiring with their kin across the sea. Fears of an internal rebellion, fueled by Ethelred's paranoia and the increasing Viking raids, reached a tipping point in the year 1002. On November 13th, Ethelred issued a royal decree calling for the extermination of all Danes residing within his realm. The order was clear and ruthless. Every Danish man, woman, and child was to be put to the sword, with no exceptions. The king's orders spread swiftly across the land, reaching key towns and cities with significant Danish populations. In places like Oxford, London, and other settlements in the south, local authorities and militia were instructed to carry out the killings. The Danish settlers, many of whom had lived peacefully in England for years, were completely unaware of the horror that awaited them. The massacre was set to take place on November 13th, the feast day of St. Brice, a day traditionally associated with acts of piety and devotion. Instead, it became a day of bloodshed and betrayal. On the fateful morning, the slaughter began. In towns and villages across England, Danish men, women, and children were hunted down and mercilessly killed. Reports describe houses being set ablaze, people being cut down in the streets, and entire families wiped out. One of the most infamous incidents of the massacre took place in Oxford, where a group of Danes sought refuge in the Church of St. Fridswide. Desperate to escape the slaughter, they barricaded themselves inside, hoping for sanctuary. But mercy was not to be found. The Anglo-Saxon attackers set the church ablaze, burning everyone inside alive. Word of the massacre quickly reached Denmark, and the news enraged King Sweyn Forkbeard. Among the dead was reportedly Gunhild, his sister, an event that turned the Danish king's wrath toward vengeance. Sweyn vowed retribution and launched a series of devastating invasions in response. Over the next decade, Denmark's attacks on England became fiercer and more frequent, culminating in Sweyn's invasion of 1013. The Danish forces swept through the land, pillaging towns and exacting revenge for their slain kin. The massacre that Ethelred had hoped would end the Danish threat instead brought England to its knees. By 1013, Sweyn Forkbeard's forces had seized much of England, and Ethelred was forced to flee into exile in Normandy. Sweyn declared himself King of England, marking the first time the country was ruled by a Danish monarch. Though Ethelred would briefly reclaim the throne after Sweyn's death, the massacre had permanently weakened his reign. The St. Brice's Day massacre ultimately paved the way for the Danish conquest of England. Just a few years later, in 1016, Sweyn's son Canute the Great would become king, establishing a North Sea empire that stretched from England to Denmark and Norway.